Those of you who don't know Dalbert, we are a consulting firm and we only work in the social impact space. So it's a real privilege to be here amongst all of you and sharing some of our thinking on how do we reimagine the S in ESG. So that's what we'll be talking about today. I did a little quick show of hands and I'll do it again. How many of you are from CSR teams, foundations, like the funders? How many of you are from that? How many of you from implementation organizations, NGOs? Okay, fair bunch. And the last category I had called out earlier were researchers, think tanks, academia. Okay, some of that. Okay, great. Thank you. This conversation largely is towards the CSR organizations, the corporates themselves. However, as implementing organizations and academia, you can sort of maybe take away some of the thinking that we have on how to reimagine the S in ESG. So without ado, I'll ask my colleague Anushka, who's also here to support in this presentation, to get started. This is what we'll discuss today. What is the S in ESG? And we would like to hear from you. So I'm hoping, I can see all phones. I'm also hoping you have internet because we're going to make you do some work. Why do businesses need to become socially inclusive in today's world? Why that? And you can by that already start understanding. I'm going to make you redefine the S. Why is it difficult to achieve? How can you get there? And we'll share some examples and case studies to make it real for you. You've been here for a day and a half, so I'm sure, and in your profession, you've heard enough about the importance and the growing movement towards ESG, whether it's about the monies flowing into it, the dedicated people across industries, sectors, locations, all over, right? There's a concerted effort to become more ESG compliant, right? Now, when you go to the, but what we are seeing is, you go to the next page, this narrative of ESG, the S is lagging. So if you remember, I don't know how many, you seem fairly young in this crowd, how many of you remember like the Enron days where governance was an issue, accountability was an issue? Governance really picked up over the last couple of decades, right? At the back of climate change, you're seeing that with E. Social is still lagging. It is still like, and you can see statistics everywhere, whatever different methodologies you may use, the ratings on the S component are clearly lagging. Which is not to say the others, E and G are very important too, but S needs to pick up. So what we're sort of doing is, we want to pause here, and if I may ask each of you to scan that code if you can, or if you go to this website called menti.com and type in that code, whichever is easier. We would like you to give us one word or two words on what do you believe S should mean or should represent in ESG. Don't just say social because that we all know, but like what aspect of social do you think it needs to represent? Is the question clear? Yeah, go for it. You can put as many as you want. Yeah. But just like short one word, 2 words. So what should the S mean or represent? Is it working for you guys? Are you able to type in your answer?
Code is in the clear. The code is in the clear.
Can you go back, Anushka? They want to see the code.
Yeah.
I can tell you. Okay, we can see answers already. Okay, we've got 40 responses so far, and it's emerging. Interestingly, social, that has to do with the middle. It's okay. Interesting. I want us to read some of these words as they're shaping. There's inclusion, social inclusion. By that I'm meaning folks are saying everybody needs to be included. Sustainability, which is an aspect of environment sustainability, but also sustainable solutions. I can see supply chain engagement, scientific suffering. I love the S words we come up with. All aspects, all social aspects. Oh my God, the screen is so bright. Health, safety, community, workforce disclosure, community development, stakeholders, customers. Interesting. I'm happy to see customers there too, as you're thinking about it. So it's very interesting how, as you're thinking social, in fact, can you stay back for a second? I'm seeing that anybody write compliance there. Did anybody write compliance? You've got rights, citizens' rights, companionship. Okay. It's a good word cloud that you're creating. Sensible, interesting, and it came out quite strong. Let's move to the next page. The way, typically, if you will read ESG metrics and various sort of frameworks, the way S is defined, of course it stands for social, but it is defined with a very compliance lens. It talks about your workers, in workers, human rights compliance, workforce, labor laws compliance. And from a community perspective also, it again talks about from a responsibility lens. I like to say, these laws need to be followed, XYZ needs to be done. It's high on just burden to be compliant. We believe it needs to be broader, right? It needs to take a whole of a society approach. And the way we think about it is that we believe S needs to stand for across a value chain, from your suppliers to your customers, right? With workers and community also being part of it. It needs to go across each one of these stakeholders. That's the S that we want to make it stand for. So it's with your customers. Somebody had that word customers in that word cloud too. When you think about S needs to stand for designing solutions for those that are unserved or underserved. I was just talking to Sneha before, and she was talking about how she works with children with disabilities. Do you know it's 15% of the population of the world? How many of the NGOs working here or private sector is really solutioning for them? Very few probably, right? But that should be part of your S. When you think about suppliers, it's not just about, ethical sourcing. Of course, very important ethical sourcing, but it's also about strengthening your suppliers. Talking about local indigenous communities, right? Like local sourcing. That's how you strengthen and make your supply chains resilient. When you talk about community, it's not just about making schools and hospitals. That's not what S should stand for in ESG. It should be about how do you empower those communities themselves. So I think that is what we would want to make all of you try to reimagine and broaden the definition of S. Don't just limit it to compliance. Make it broader. Make it include all stakeholders and make it a socially inclusive business and socially inclusive society. That's the thing that we want to say. Future leaders, and for those of you who are corporates who are putting monies, and NGOs who are actually implementing organizations working in this space, we need to create socially inclusive businesses to maximize their resilience, right? And this is a proven theory that, you must have again read, many of you I know are in academia and some of you are still students, about the triple bottom line, that you work with your suppliers, employees, distributors, customers to strengthen the bottom of the pyramid, right? And improve their profit. And in that process, it can be a profitable business there. And this is where you are, if you take this approach, your ability to then drive towards the SDGs is what is the outcome you want to measure and drive. Why is it important? This is no surprise, right? This is a very unique time in our being. I've been working now for around 23 years, and I can say I have not seen any cycle where so many things are hitting us at the same time. You've got AI on one side, is disrupting the skills. We all need to in this room also, upskill, change our skills. Geopolitical instabilities, well, nobody needs to talk about what's happening around the world today. economic uncertainty, investors asking, right? You have investors now who are going to ask you, are you doing gender investing? Is your portfolio supporting that? You're going to be asked that. You're not get funding if you're not. The demand for inclusion from your employees, from your workers, from your suppliers, climate change. And this impacts everybody. There's no running away, right? So when you're hitting with so many things together, you need to do things differently. And the thing that I want to bring to a lot of the corporates in the room and also the NGOs, if you're planning programs in this, there's actually a business case for this. Right? So if you are an NGO who's thinking about designing solutions for customers in the bottom of the pyramid, right, or working with suppliers in local communities, really empowering them, you can actually go to private sector. But actually, there's a business case. I did a recent work with women farmers. It's proven if you're able to work with women smallholder farmers, their yield is 25 to 30% higher. So why wouldn't you capacitate them? Why wouldn't you support them? Right, as core businesses, which now allow a lot of corporates have taken on. So whether it's about your customers, they pay you more, whether it's for your own talent, organizations that are building socially inclusive businesses and are working in those programs, your talent pays more, you're ahead of the compliance, you're managing your risk, your reputation, and you're just innovating more, right? Because when you are, in a way, thinking and designing solutions for probably those that are more excluded, you'll actually bring everybody along with it. So we want to sort of pause here again and ask you again to do this exercise wherein, why do you think today as CSR, funders, NGOs, why do you think a very narrow definition of S? Why is it just about making schools, providing meals, or just human rights? Why is that? Why are businesses not able to embrace S fully? Would love to. Is the question clear? Yeah. I'm so excited to read these answers. The good thing is, if you put in these answers, you've been thinking about it already. Anishka, do you want to scroll up? Folks can see. Did you read my presentation before? It's like language is the same. This is fantastic, right? And just pausing it for you to all read as you sort of see. Why is it hard? It is hard. And this is me saying I was in the private sector for 20 years. I have not done anything else in that private sector. I was working in a real estate firm, so you can imagine that, there was no estimate. It is hard. So let's talk about, if you toggle back to our presentation, why is it hard? And the reason I want to, it's interesting that we in our group also have implementing organizations, because if you're able to solve for these challenges, you may be able to support corporates to say, I'll help you with this. Okay. So here's what the way we think, why are businesses finding it really hard? Businesses in general take solutions to be an engineering problem or a product problem. But when you are designing socially inclusive businesses, it's a human problem. You need to understand, and folks have that, right? We don't know the beneficiaries. We don't understand who is it that we are solving for. You need to bring a lot of sectors together. It's not like, for this example that I was telling you about in agriculture when we worked with, it was not just about understanding the agriculture, like the yields, the crop cycles. It was to understand financial inclusion for women. It was to understand the health situations, right? So there are a lot of sectors that come together and solutions that we need to design socially inclusively. This process of coming up with solutions also, and I'm sure a lot of our NGO partners here will say that in general, it's an iterative process. It can't be 5-year business plan and khat, now this is how we do. You need to iterate, you need to try. You will do one pilot, you will say, you'll tinker, you'll say this was, this didn't work. So it has to be iterative. Somebody had that also. You need to, they will be long, you have to make investments, but the returns will be long term. You may not get short term gains. Folks had this mindset change and a behavior change. You have to start from the top of your organization. And this applies to our NGOs also as well as the private sector to say the CEO needs to believe in both kind of organization, and this is important. And there is, I've already shown you, there is a business case in this. You will be able to articulate it. Some of the impacts and outcomes will be longer term, the time to return may be longer, but there is a business case that can be articulated. So you need to know that and you need to define that for the respective areas that you're thinking on. So we sort of then try to break down how do you actually do it. It's all good. He challenges, right? So how do we make it happen? So when you are doing your entire strategy development, and we are strategy consultants, that's what we know how to do, is you need to change the approach across the entire cycle of strategy development. When you're planning, it needs to move from these fixed business plans to defining what is the purpose you want to have. You've heard of this theory of change. I love theory of change. I never did theory of change in the private sector. But I understand why theory of change is so important in this space, right? Define the theory of change and then translate that into bite-sized programs and pilots, interventions that you can trust. The design, you need to design not for your average customer. You need to design at the margins. That's the difference you need to do. Execution, it cannot be fixed contracts, and this is me saying to both the NGOs and the CSRs in the room, right? You cannot be, please do not treat each other like a vendor contract relationship. It has to be a partnership. And you have to realize that it will be iterative. And targets, right? If you just define KPIs, itna input, itna output, it won't work. There have to be an entire cascade to impact with short, medium-term, long-term outcomes that you define. And here are some tangible things that you can try. I already spoke about defining that sort of social purpose, a clear sort of articulation of how you work with different stakeholders. Working with your organization. This is absolutely key. How do you sort of work from the top to the bottom and really change that organization culture? They need to understand that we need to sort of drive this. This design, I want to sort of take a very quick example. Do any of you know RCRC, this network of 100+ NGOs in our country? Okay, interesting. They should market more. It's a large organization, which is a coalition of 100 NGOs. And they have taken this approach of what they call an equity-centered research to understand ground up. So they actually work, the NGOs are doing the research themselves. So you're not doing research on the beneficiaries, you're doing research with actually they don't even use the word beneficiary. Right? So how do you do that is when you will actually develop solutions with the people and not for the people. That's really important. In execution, the trickiest partnerships. You cannot do it alone. These are complex problems. And then in measurement, like I said, you have to take an outcome-oriented approach, which my sense is the NGO space works like that. But I haven't seen that in CSR so much. CSR still wants, which is okay. You need to hold, you need to report, but see how you can blend the two to get that. So I think that's the core. I'm going to pause here for a moment to see if there are any questions, reflections. I'll take some case studies for you to go again.
During your conversation, if you could also share a difference of shared value approach.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, shared value approach versus the S that you spoke about. How are they two different, or are they similar?
Yeah.
One question is, we are talking about the S, but really society need it? Because sometime I feel society can do themselves and they are better, but we see, okay, they need us and we should enter into it. They are better than what our interventions are.
Yeah, these are, so one is a technical, sorry, go on.
In one of the slides you had shown.
Why did you
Yeah.
start this thing?
In one of the slides you displayed that if the businesses are there, they need to design for average customer. So does it mean you're saying that average customer? You wrote that word, average customer. So does it mean that the companies who are working for a elite are not doing this? Do you believe that?
Yeah, I'll explain. Sure. Let me answer these three. I'm going to forget. Okay. So then we'll come back to it. So your question was the shared value. The principle is actually quite similar to the shared value concept that's also being used. I guess the difference that we are sort of trying to bring is the approach of how do you actually build inclusive businesses. Right? If the concept of shared value talks about working with all stakeholders and taking them along. So to that extent, the concept is similar, but it's the approach that we have to take is different. There was a question that you asked, right, in terms of why is it even needed? And then the society just kind of figured it out themselves. I think there is enough to say that unless businesses take on the responsibility across the value chain to support each part of the stakeholders, business as usual will not work. You see the disruptions that are facing. Today, if you do not actively build local sourcing and strengthen indigenous communities to be your suppliers, you can be easily hit with all those global disruptions. Right? Today, if you're not sort of taking care of your communities beyond just providing schools and education, if you're not helping them to economically grow, where are you going to get your talent from? So there is this sort of the recognition that how things are so dynamic and changing that I do not believe, and this is a view, it's a perspective, right? Our view is you need to be very intentional, and businesses need to take responsibility for this. Your question was, remind me.
You mentioned
the average customer and the elite, right? So there is no. I've said all of this. Like I was sharing with you, I used to work in a real estate firm before. I used to sell products at 50 crores. Right? So, however, but even in that, it's not about that I should not be, of course, make money, right? That's what a business stands for. Your first goal is maximize shareholder profit. It's about how you still take your value chain together. So in that, in our business, in real estate, we used to work with our suppliers, which in real estate are very small MSMEs, micro contractors, and how can you capacitate them? So it's a recognition of that. That is S. S does not mean that suddenly I need to start making 5 lakh homes. I can. And there is a business case to that also. Right? So I think it's an understanding of that. And in some markets, some categories, there is an opportunity. I'll take an example of one of the cases where you do have an opportunity of designing products for those underserved and the marginalized, which is not the average customer. But it depends on your category.
Would I do that if I'm doing certain things and I'm making something for elite, even if it is a business case, like you gave an example of 50 crore home you are making, and you can make 5 lakh rupees home also, and you can still make profit. But do you want to do that?
It's a business at the end. I recognize that, right? The point that I'm saying is, one, when you're thinking about your S, think of it bigger, right? Don't just limit to compliance. And now in that, you will assess that, right? Well, actually, there is a business opportunity or developing a 5 lakh home also. The scale could be this. This is what I could do. You may say, well, my capability, I cannot do it. That's fine, but you'll do other things. I think that's the thing. At least starting to have that conversation and see what makes sense for your business and your corporate. There were some questions here.
Yeah. So, hi. So, like my question is already answered when you told me about how we have to involve the consumer as a supplier as well. So my question with it comes, like if we are involving the consumer as a supplier, so how we are taking care of the governance when it comes to the ESG, and especially sustainability when you talk about, social we talk about, so the corporates are implementing the project. I feel while working in national corporation and designing project, I feel the governance to be involved in a social in this. That's how we can differentiate between the CSR and ESG in a more consumer and human-centric way.
So if your point that you need, I didn't fully understand you, are you trying to say that when you're designing this, you still need to keep governance?
Yeah, as a part of the...
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And that is the tricky part, absolutely.
Thank you. So the idea here is that, one of the major hallmarks of, let's say, being socially inclusive is being outcome driven at every single stage, right? Now, when you are sort of expanding the S, as you said, and sort of seeking out more business opportunities within that expansion, I think the reason why it becomes sort of hard is in large part due to this constant measuring of outcomes. So my question then is that how then, let's say, do you articulate the business case for it and convince corporations to sort of go ahead?
It's a great one, and thank you for that pivot. I'll answer it in a moment with a case study, and I'll explain to you some methods you can use to do that. So if I may, we have more time for questions. I just wanted to see where the room was. So if you move, I'll actually share with you, I'll come back to your question in 2 minutes. One, I'll share with you examples of 2 leading organizations in India and globally who indeed have grasped the whole concept of socially inclusive businesses. Right? I did not take Unilever, everybody speaks about them deliberately. One I've taken is Marico, and the other I'll speak about is IKEA. So Marico, everybody knows, we all have grown up putting parachute oil in our hair, that it is the leader in the FMCG space. And if you see any ESG rankings globally, it'll be in the top quartile. Right? What is it doing? See, like, I'm leaving this page and I'll read out a few things for you. So when you talk about community, working in the community, all you CSR sort of folks here in NGOs, they are pushing the bound as to how do you really empower the community. So on one point, they've sort of course, I'm sure they must be doing the classic schools and nutrition programs and education. Go do that. But see, what they've done is, how do they sort of build a method of water conservation that has helped their business, but it will help that society also, that community also, right? Making it more water resilient. They have built this academy where they are skilling young aspirants, women aspirants they're focusing on, building that community's strength itself. That is truly, broadening the definition of S. Let me take the example of suppliers. This is one of my favorites, and I've sort of studied this quite a lot, the Parachute Kalpa Vriksha program. Many FMCGs have similar things, but I think Marico is doing this distinctively. They understand the importance of the palm oil, the coconut oil farmers, the coconut farmers. And really they are working with them to capacity build. Everything from scientific knowledge to, funding, supporting, advisory, then of course demand aggregation, all of that. But how did they building that entire ecosystem? That's core business. Right? It is the core raw material for them, right? But they're investing in this. They've just not left it ki to karna hi hai, whatever. They're owning that part. Even in overall, right, like understanding, and Marico is a front leader in innovation. It's, how they're really working on skill upgradation, gender equality. So I think these are the kind of examples I want to see, to say this is when corporates that are really embracing the S fully are doing. Let me give an example of IKEA also, if you move to the next page. Another leading organization, I think most of us by now have some IKEA furniture in our house. Right? Global organization. And see again, when they think community, what are they doing? They're building social entrepreneurs. Right? So how they're sort of building these enterprises, working with small scale farmers, different workers. I want to talk about the customer angle here, and I think you asked a question. Again, this depends on the business case. For them, there was a business case where they have actually developed off-grid solar lamps for low-income households. And they took a very weak, like as Dalbert we have done in this, so I'm sort of a little more privy to this. where we actually did a human-centered sort of approach of understanding what is the need of these households and what kind of product do they need. The pricing, how do you sell it, the channels, all of that. But there is a business to it. They've done it. And again, there are similar things that you will see in terms of the link also back to the E. IKEA, all products have a circular economy to it. Right? So recyclable, how do you sort of? So it's very important to sort of think about all of these integrated. I now come to an example where I also sort of take your question on how do I make that business case work. So this is an engagement we have done quite recently with an organization that many of you may know. It's a social enterprise called Vihat. It's a agri-tech firm, 2,000 crores revenue annual, and they have a huge scale already, almost close to 2 million farmers in 12 states they reach. When we started work with them, the problem statement we took to them is, your face of the farmer in India has changed. 85% of our farmers are women. Only 12% own land. Their decision making, their ability to actually drive inputs, outward decisions, very low. What are you doing about it? And how are you going to deal with this change? It's a change, right? Your question is change. There is urban migration. The fate of the farmer has changed. Now, for them, the problem was typically businesses, they have this sort of, hum aise kaam kar rahe hain, we will keep working like this. This is the way we approach the men farmer, and they take the same approach. But actually, it won't. Your customer in this case is different, and so you need to design differently for them. So we work with them through this approach where, again, we really believe in the human-centered design approach, where we work with them to understand what are the needs, aspirations for women smallholder farmers, how do you reach out to them, what are the challenges they face. Like, for example, I'm sure you've heard of this, right? I am not able to take a decision because my husband does not allow me. That is the truth. I have personally visited so many farmers, women farmers, where they said, I know this is the right method, but I'm not able to use it till he allows me to. So how do you then do male engagement? That's a very important intervention to do that. So we designed this entire, some very interesting things we did. We created this entire journey for the women, from making them aware to onboarding them, to engaging them. How do you do that to then make them a sustainable channel? And one of the sort of the posters that we designed is, typically we had this poster where it was, I don't think you have it here, where there was just a male farmer, and they called it Khan Chacha. Then we said, there has to be a woman, there has to be a girl child, and there has to be a cow. Because that's what a farming household in India looks like today. Right? And I deeply resonated. We ran a campaign and they sort of onboarded close to 90,000 women farmers in Uttar Pradesh in the span of 6 months. And it's a channel now for them, right? It's a new business line, new customer that they've found. Now, to your question, I'll take that. We had found it really hard. They said, we don't know whether this will work or not. Right? There's a huge, we don't know, there's so much investment you're asking us to make. We have to create a separate extension field team or women extension field team. Why should we make that investment? What if it doesn't work? Right? In our IVRS call center, we have to put woman agent. We have to do many different things. We have to change our app. So the way we did it was using blended finance in this case. So we got philanthropy. So Walmart Foundation was the philanthropy. They have, in this case, it's a 1:3 leverage. So they put X dollars, we had to put 3X dollars. Right? So they had somebody sort of de-risking them. So you need to see, no business today is going to just sort of take, whether it's about creating a new product, like even the 5 lakh rupees home example, there is, businesses need de-risking. That's the way private sector works like that. Right? So either you need de-risking through advice, you help me with some technical advice, advice, that capacity building, or you give me de-risking money in terms of just OPEX, first loss guarantee. There is some kind of blended finance structures that are needed. And that is it's a fair sort of ask from private sector, that if you're going to make me do this, I need also others to chip in. Which is why this kind of a forum is really interesting. I'm not sure if you have any foundations with philanthropic capital sitting in the room, but that's the thing that you can push to get to this. Yeah, so I think that's really broadly what I want to cover. One last thing that I want to sort of share is, see, each one of you is at a different point in your corporate journey. Right? Some of you are already, you have a clear social purpose that is broad. Some of you are at the point of, I think we're doing a good job in the community, but we don't, and really empowering them, but we don't know how to engage the other stakeholders. We don't know how to design products for different marginalized customers, right? We don't know if there's a business case. I think it's completely fine. You don't need to go end to end. Start where you want to start. Right? Just a recognition, it's an iterative process. You will figure out what works for you and for your business. Yeah. So, so I think that's really what I have to cover. I can open back to questions and any other things that you guys are thinking as you went through this. Will you go back to the previous slide? Can you go back to the previous slide? This one? Any other questions in the room?
Ma'am, could you tell us a little more about Jihad and the before and after impact assessment results?
Can I answer one by one? I tend to forget, so I'll answer one by one. So, like I said, I think Jihad has really been on an amazing journey, and I shamelessly take their case study, of course, with their permission, to the various groups. They started, so they are a leading AgTech company, right? I think where they started, they didn't even have gender disaggregated data. How many farmers are male or female? They didn't have that. Now they have a different channel for how do I serve women smallholder farmers. There is no other better proof of an outcome of a gender transformation, right? And how they really embraced the concept that we need to build a socially inclusive business.
Hi, I'm Bushra. I work with Grameen Foundation. I just wanted to know about what cultural and the social shift have you observed after the women intervention?
Yeah, the cultural shift has been, it's been dramatic, right? To that extent, and we're just sticking with the Dihad example. From there, sort of, when we started work, like I was sharing, when you enter the lobby, there was a Khan Chacha standing. Now there is a Khan Chacha and a Chachi standing. That's amazing. But in terms of the organization, the CEO also sort of recognizing that this is a legit business case and sort of pursuing their organization, in terms of what they need to do for the women farmers, but also internal representation. That is equally important, right? What is the gender representation inside the organization? So their extension field force, like I was sharing with you, they're actually hired, recognizing that the middle layer, there's the whole concept of women for women. So they've really sort of intentionally built that layer too. It's an investment that they're making. So I think that's the kind of change that you're beginning to see.
And do you, as in my organization, we do the parallel intervention with the NGOs and the farmers out there. So have you, along with Bihar, have you started this intervention with the FPOs? Because the FPO organization is like as per the government rules, the particular amount of women's participation is
we're doing a lot of work, not only with Bihar, but many other players, Frontier Markets, Samunati, HESA, many players, with the FPOs as well, especially how do you build women representation, capacity building there, a lot of work. So we can catch up offline on that too.
So just going back to the IKEA example, so their ESG scores might be great because of the compliance stuff you mentioned, like especially the S factor, things like labor laws and things like that, all those policies that they have, or their less labor accidents, things like that would improve their scores essentially. Then things like lamps and all, I would ask, is that very material to their business? Because I think one important aspect is materiality when you're talking about ESG outside of ratings. When you think of IKEA, circular economy makes more sense to improve that stuff. But then you would think, what percentage of people are actually recycling their products? What they majorly do is they cut down forests and use the wood for that, and then they say they plant it back, but that takes many years in order to, we know that stuff. So my question would be, I think the ratings have a perverse incentive for a lot of corporates. I think that there's the short-term stuff through compliance, and a lot of businesses kind of paper over the cracks with like smaller interventions that may not be super material to their business. So how would you kind of manage those two things?
It's a really good question. And this question of materiality will always come, and it's the same, similar to what even earlier gentlemen asked about. Do I need to build 5 lakh homes, right? My business is 50 lakhs, right? I think it's the. Do I have a full answer? I actually don't have a full answer for it, right? I guess a hypothesis that you need to sort of take a sum of parts. So you're absolutely right. Well, IKEA is cutting down trees and also just growing these, planting is not the answer. But the fact that we are pushing circularity, it is a behavior, it's both a process change and a behavior change that they are driving to in the business. It will make a difference slowly. Right? Similarly, the fact that they are designing products for these underserved segments, I think those are the steps. Now, honestly, none of them flow into the S component in the metrics today because that's not how it's measured. The measurement today is labor laws, compliance. Right? What I am sort of, what we as Dalberg are really saying is, you need to first broaden it and also change the measurement metrics. So I don't see, if we all start just talking about materiality in the short term is going to be. Like we need to sort of have the hypothesis and say these steps together will move this and will move these broader outcomes which take time. So I think it's that view that we have to take.
So,
yeah, thank you for answering the previous question. I'm Bhavya from Balbani, as I introduced myself before. I think, so one answer to how you convince, let's say, businesses to cash in on this expanding social ESG is by de-risking. I want to go a little deeper into that. So can you tell us, and I noticed that ratio of 1:3. One example. So can you tell us how de-risking really works when you're sort of trying to convince these non-profits or businesses to take up these, risky ones? And what are some, let's say, other interventions apart from de-risking that aid in, sort of capturing the social?
Sure. I'll take another example. At Dalberg, we're also running the Skilling Impact Bond, which is a development bond. Again, I'm picking a better finance example, so I'll stick to that. Where we are working with both private sector and NGO service providers to push them to see how they can move beyond just training and placing candidates. How can they drive change to get women candidates sustainably placed in jobs? Do you know 10%, only 10% of candidates who get placed are in jobs after 3 months in short-term skilling? Right? So the way we are doing that is by providing, so it's a bond, it's a development bond, so there are different instruments. Blended finance is a lot of different ways. It's a good method, I believe, to tell the service providers, I am giving you risk capital. You do it. So you don't worry, NGO, private sector. And then separately between risk investors and philanthropy, they figure out if those outcomes are met, then risk investors, the philanthropy will give them some return. So it's a triangle in this case, right? The example. So one method is to use blended capital and recognizing that organizations have different risk profiles. How do you move the curve, reduce the risk? You have to do all of those kind of things. See, the other approaches is taking a more ecosystem influence approach. Like in many large organizations, money is not the issue. Like, so if you, again going back to that example, if you ask the developer that I was working on to do a 5 lakh, yes, they can do it. Right? So if they're able to create a story and an ecosystem influence, that is their ROI. Right? That we did this, we created this new model, it can really scale, we can now change the entire, PM housing scheme to in this way. That is the kind of impact and ambition that can drive it. So you have to use different incentive structures and methods and for different organizations, and it works differently, right? But I do believe that de-risking and that cost, operational, both and the risk, that is a real thing that needs to be solved for. Do we have?
Hi, I'm Rahul from IIT Kanpur. In ESG, for E you have quite good defined objective parameters. For G also we have been able to define some. On S, at the moment these are mostly laws. But what are the discussions happening, through Dalberg, through BCG, through most of the defining policy and consulting firms? What could be the good objective parameters to actually define S with, numbers, putting in ratings, apart from the laws?
So it's a fantastic question, and I have to say, as Dalberg, I haven't done intentional work in that, the metric definition, but very much in need, like you were saying, it's just not measured very narrowly. There is a camp at Dalberg that I'll tell you, we are split whether to even care about ESG, right? Like, should we even care about ESG, or should our focus be on SDGs? I'm the SDG camp, as you could have sort of figured out in this conversation. I don't believe in ESG, I believe in SDG really. However, going back to if you had to think first principle and like how the metrics should be thought about, if you continue the ESG framing, which is picking up, it's a good method, right? I think you need to take that stakeholder view and see all the stakeholders and then think about how, and not just a rights-based in compliance, worker rights, labor laws, but maybe things like, say for your suppliers, to ask businesses, what percentage of your sourcing is indigenous? Right? How many jobs have you created locally? Right? What is your resource utilization locally? And it's like, think about those disaggregated metrics, which will then allow businesses to also say, well, actually, I need to do more. So it's a great question and a great problem statement to take up. But I haven't seen a lot of thinking on that because, to be fair, people do box S in that very narrow way today. Are we good? Okay, thank you for your. Oh, you talked about survey we've done with 100 NGOs. What was that about? No, so it's not. RCRC, it's a coalition. RCRC. Check it out. One of my very favorite organizations. It is a coalition of 100+ NGOs, and they themselves ran a survey with their partner NGOs on the vulnerability in rural India. They published a report too. So it was just an example for you to explain the concept of equity-centered research, which is you would work with the beneficiary. Okay, excellent. Thank you folks. Hope you had a slightly different conversation.